Hey guys, it's Liv, back at it again with a third video. I have been spending hours moving around all my lighting equipment trying to get it right. I usually film at night, and the daytime has brought a whole new set of challenges to this whole YouTube thing. The sun is my op right now. I am not enjoying that feature of the earth. You know when you start having to nitpick things and then it just gets you in this mode of procrastination where you're like, I just can't start this because I have to move this light over a teeny little bit and make another cup of tea, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's like I've been procrastinating actually sitting down and filming the video, but I'm out of that mode right now and I'm ready to go because I have a whole video planned about a topic that I'm feeling extremely fervent about lately. So, as I've stated before, I am currently 24 years old, which makes me a proud member of Generation Z. And over the past few months, I have been seeing a lot of negative rhetoric about our generation, particularly coming from older generations talking smack about us. So, a lot of this rhetoric and conversation, I just don't relate to at all. These video clips and articles are painting our generation as antisocial, technology addicted losers who don't drink, don't work, and who will ultimately fade into oblivion as they approach yet another hour of screen time. And I just don't relate to that. So let's talk about it. We're going to talk about some facts, we're going to bring in some data, and I'm going to question some of this and kind of give my own personal take on what might be happening here. So let's get into it. So my passion for this topic has been building up over a long period of time. But this bubble of passion, per se, finally burst when I saw this TikTok.
Had someone ask me today if they should take 120K remote, fully remote, or 240K to go into the office. And I was like, huh? And without even checking their profile, I absolutely knew they were a Gen Z. I knew their age started with a 2. Because for you to even ask the question of whether you should take 120,000 extra dollars a year just to go to the office, just to march your little booty to the office, sit there, fuck around for a few hours, make some friends, eat the free donuts and leave. What do you guys think goes on at the office? It's not that scary. It was for a time, but right now it's not that scary. It's not that scary, especially for 120,000 extra dollars a year. It's not that scary. It's nice. It gives you structure. Make you guys less weird if you made some friends and had somewhere to be. I'm just saying.
So that is my girl Tinks talking about Gen Z. I love Tinks, okay? She is a millennial. She is known as the internet's big sister, giving advice on dating and relationships and really just general advice to help you live a better life and be happy with your life. So I love her. I listen to her 3 times a week. I'm actually in the top 0.5% of her listeners on Spotify for this year of 2025. So I love Tinks, but there was a part of this video that rubbed me the wrong way. And maybe I'm being a bit sensitive because I am a member of Gen Z, but this is just the point at which I was like, I've got to talk about this. It just made me need to stand up and defend my generation. So for the most part, I don't have an issue with what's being said at all in the video. I think there's definitely some shock value to the fact that someone wouldn't take 120 extra $1,000 to go into the office versus working remotely, especially when that's 100% increase of your income. It's not like you're going from making $1 million to 1.1 million. That would significantly change your lifestyle. Where I have an issue is towards the end of the video. It was the final few seconds of the video where, even if it's for comedic purposes, it captures the overall point of view that I think a lot of people have about our generation. So let's watch that.
It gives you structure. Make you guys less weird if you made some friends and had somewhere to be. I'm just saying.
Okay, it's that right there. People thinking that we're weird and we don't have friends. That is what I want to talk about. That ending part of the video where it's, a little condescending, kind of infantilizing us. That's what I didn't love, and I still love Tinks. I just didn't love that part of the video. So that is just the starting point that made me want to dig into this topic and present this in a way where maybe we're not as bad off as everyone else is making us out to seem. So to continue introducing this rhetoric about our generation, there is another person that talks a lot about young people, young men in particular. And I actually found this person from Tinks, and I really do like him. His name is Scott Galloway. He is a Gen Xer who has started and sold multiple successful companies, and he has an extremely successful podcast about business, politics, the stock market. And he also is a major advocate for young men in particular. I think my favorite, I think my filler phrase is in particular. I've noticed I say that all the time. I feel like it makes me sound a little more, you know. So back to Scott Galloway. He's been on a press tour for his book, Notes on Being a Man. And I haven't read this book. I probably won't read the book, but I've seen some of the media from the press tour. And one of the things that he talks about is the male loneliness crisis. And it really is framed towards young men and the fact that they're having trouble getting out there and finding friends or girlfriends or wives. So let's look at a clip where he's talking about that.
45% of men 18 to 25 have never approached a woman in person.
Never asked a woman out in person, and what they're up against, think about it. Our economy literally rests on 10 companies now, often referred to as the Magnificent 10. And they do several things, but quite frankly, they're in the business of enragement, polarization, and then sequestering young people from all other activities.
And that's only getting worse given where AI is going. I mean, with like, agents and chatbots who are, sexually clad anime type figures chatting with young men.
Well, it starts pretty innocent. When you use AI, have you noticed the prompts are almost irresistible at the end? Let me put this in a series of tweets.
Right.
Before you know it, you're 3 hours deep. But effectively, these companies have attached the entire economy and literally trillions of dollars to trying to get people to, or trying to convince young people, specifically young men who are more susceptible, because quite frankly, their prefrontal cortices isn't as developed, to try and convince them they can have a reasonable facsimile of life online. Why go through the hierarchy of trying to make friends? It's not easy, right? Why try to figure out how to navigate a corporate, all this, when you can go on Reddit or Discord and find friends, or you can trade crypto or stocks on Robinhood or Coinbase? And why, Anderson, would you go through the rejection, the dressing well, the effort, the expense, the humiliation, developing a kindness practice of trying to establish a romantic partnership when you have literally lifelike synthetic porn? So what are we doing? I think we have our economy is attached to one objective, and that is to evolve a new species of asocial, asexual males. Unintentionally, we have an economic interest right now, I would argue, in planning our own extinction.
So obviously in that clip, it's young men in particular that are facing loneliness. Here's one more TikTok from the New York Post talking about how Gen Z doesn't like to drink.
Sad news for happy hour. Gen Z doesn't even know what it is. Grabbing a drink with colleagues is on the decline, and it's all thanks to how remote work blurred the lines of when the workday actually ends.
We've been doing the 5 at 5 o'clock for 13 years.
I've never gone to
I've
happy
never
hour.
seen a happy hour in my life. I mean, I can't even remember what it's like.
I mean, we used to have so much fun at Fox. What was that place, Langan's, or the
Yes,
other Irish
yes.
place? You go in there and you get pints for $1, and you just drink for hours, and then you have to wake up and you have to go work for O'Reilly the next morning. That was the worst hangover ever.
It blows my mind how someone can have a platform and get on there and say Gen Z doesn't know what happy hour is. So one of the comments from that TikTok says, "Why does the media always talk about us like we're aliens or something? ... We know what happy hour is." 34,000 likes. That is how I feel, okay? Gen Z doesn't even know what it is. What? Come on, y'all. If you are Gen Z and you don't know what happy hour is, let me know in the comments and I will be quiet. Okay, and then I also read this Time article titled "Why Gen Z is Drinking Less." And one of the reasons that they call out is that it might be due to a lack of socialization, since alcohol is generally a social drug. And so if Gen Z is just so antisocial, then no reason to drink then, right? I guess not. It says alcohol tends to be a social drug, even for young people. So part of the decline in underage drinking could be related to less in-person socializing. On average, the amount of time people spent with friends in person decreased from 30 hours a month in 2003 to 10 hours a month in 2020, according to the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory on the epidemic of loneliness. And then that decline was especially marked for people aged 15 to 24. The reason I am here today is not to discount that we are spending less time with each other and why that may be an issue. I just feel like this rhetoric of Gen Z being weird and antisocial has been lit on fire by the media. There's countless articles about Gen Z being lonely. So I'm going to go through some data and I'm going to give my take on it. And hopefully show my generation that these negative things being said about us, that doesn't have to be our reality. I'm sure for a lot of you, you're just as confused as I am. And I'm not going to say that there aren't members of my generation struggling with mental health, with isolation, with having issues making friends. I just don't want the fact that everyone's talking and complaining about it to make it worse. For us to hear that and then adopt that mindset, that's what I don't want to happen. And I also don't think people using our isolation or loneliness, if you are dealing with that, as a punchline and a reason to say that there's no hope for us, because that's kind of the rhetoric. And I even see members of my own generation adopting some of these comments as well, saying, we're cooked. You know, that's one that I see a lot, we're cooked. So let's get into it. Let's go back to the U.S. Surgeon General's advisory that I was just talking about from the Time article. So in 2023, U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy declared that there was an epidemic of loneliness in the United States. So this advisory wasn't specific to Gen Z. It affects all age groups in the U.S., but there were some stats in the report that would be concerning to young people. So one stat says that time spent with friends has declined 70% for people ages 15 to 24. And while all age groups have experienced an increase in alone time, this increase was the largest for young people. And one of the studies cited in that report is the Cigna US Loneliness Index from 2018 to 2021. And that found that young adults are almost twice as likely to report loneliness compared to adults over the age of 65. So overall, everyone is experiencing more loneliness, but this is disproportionately affecting young people. That same Cigna group released a report based on surveys from 7,500 individuals in 2024. So they were surveying loneliness across generations, and across the 7,500 respondents, 52% said that they were experiencing loneliness. And as you can see in the chart, members of Gen Z are the highest for self-reporting this. So from the chart, you can see that 67% of Gen Z is lonely, 65% of millennials are lonely, and 60% of Gen X is lonely. And then we have boomers way down at 44%. So what I find interesting is that in this study, millennials are only 2 percentage points behind Gen Z. And then Gen X is only 5 percentage points behind millennials. And so obviously while Gen Z is the highest, I don't think that this small of a difference in percentage points is enough for our generation to be taking the brunt of concern for this loneliness crisis. While I'm not denying that there is a sort of loneliness crisis amongst US citizens, I think the media coverage that is specific to Gen Z is disproportionate to how much of an issue it really is for our generation. I'm not saying it's not an issue. I'm just not really seeing why it's so much bigger of an issue for us than other generations. And yes, I know Gen Z is higher in mental health issues than other generations, and that probably is due to our higher technology use, and we should probably all be more aware of that. It's just when things get spun off into this like negative spiral, basically catastrophizing that we're screwed, that's what I don't like. So this is me intuitively spinning off, but I think that the media probably saw this was a hot button topic, and a lot of articles got produced with this headline of Gen Z being lonely, Gen Z drinking less, Gen Z this, Gen Z that. It's like they're obsessed with us. So I'm going to bring in an article from 2018 where there was an entirely other generation headlined as the loneliness generation. Insert Wall Street Journal article, "The loneliest generation, Americans more than ever are aging alone." So subtext, loneliness undermines health and is linked to early mortality, and baby boomers are especially feeling the effects. So you can tell from the title, but the indicators they use to say that baby boomers are aging alone and are ultimately lonely were things more concrete than self-reporting. It was lower marriage rates and higher childlessness amongst boomers than what previous generations had. So, and then they go into actually depictions of real boomers' lives and kind of painting this picture of how they don't have as many people around them, and this creates kind of a lonely existence, which I think would probably be especially hard when you're at that age. So I do want to say that using different indicators can sometimes be like comparing apples to oranges. Self-reporting is obviously different than looking at stats on marriage rates or childlessness. I just want to highlight the polarity from 2018. We have this big expose come out from the Wall Street Journal highlighting baby boomers as the loneliest generation. I imagine that people went around stressfully being like, baby boomers are the loneliest generation. What are we gonna do? Like, I imagine this article coming out caused people to have sort of a negative mindset about what it might be like to be a baby boomer in 2018. Seems pretty lonely from the article. But when we go back to the chart, when it comes to self-reporting, boomers are much lower than Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So my other light did die, but I'm just gonna keep going, okay? When you read into the article, it is different. It's just the fact that they are aging with the least amount of people compared to previous generations. So, but I'm just saying, like, surface level, which is sometimes all that media is. You read news articles, you see 5-second TikToks of common rhetoric. It can spread like wildfire and create this negative mindset about a whole group of people. And basically, I'm just trying to provide some nuance that maybe it's not as bad as everyone's making it out to seem. So my overall idea is that I think everyone experiences loneliness no matter what age you are. Though boomers' self-report was a huge 14 percentage points below Gen X and 23 percentage points below Gen Z, they had a whole Wall Street Journal expose commenting on them as being the loneliest aging generation. So my open-ended question for the day is Gen Z really as bad off as society is making us out to seem? I would like to think not. But to me, I think this like Gen Z loneliness has just become a trending headline and is poorly affecting the overall outlook about who our generation is. Gen Z loneliness being a trending headline, I think is harmful to my generation. You know, we're younger. We are the generation with the least amount of life experience aside from Gen Alpha. And then we have all these negative things getting said about us. Like, what do you think that would do to young people who arguably are at a disadvantage because of our age? Like, for example, I see a lot of people complaining about Gen Z behavior in the workforce. Let's take a look.
As an employer of individuals that are in Gen Z, I have visibly seen how Gen Z is fucked. The work ethic is not there, the common sense is completely out the window, and the emotional regulation of these individuals is non-existent. Their emotions dictate every action. They do not want to show up for themselves or their future because they don't think they need to. And their ability to socialize is minuscule at best. They can barely communicate unless it's through a phone. One thing that kids in Gen Z need to absorb is self-responsibility trumps all. We understand that you need to feel in tune with your emotions, and your emotions do matter. However, responsibility comes first over everything else, regardless of how you feel and regardless of what is going on in your life. If you want to be a participating member of society, you need self-responsibility. You're going to have to be in tune with what your actions are doing on a daily basis for the life that you have created.
So part of me really thinks that these comments can be said about anyone that is in their 20s, no matter what generation they're in. Like, of course, a 40-year-old, 35-year-old guy is probably going to have better tools in their tool belt to navigate the workforce. Like, I imagine that Generation X had a hard time when they were in their 20s being the youngest people in the workforce as well. And so basically saying that bad emotional self-regulation and bad self-responsibility is a side effect of being born in a particular generation, I just don't see how that, one, is accurate, or two, is very helpful. Like, maybe we're just people in our 20s who haven't had enough life experience to figure that stuff out yet. And maybe instead of going on a podcast and talking very poorly about an entire generation, you just go to your employee, notice that they need some improvement, and try to help them. That would probably do a lot more good for the world than sitting on a podcast and complaining about a whole group of 70 million people. So I found an article from the Society for Human Resource Management that sums up this point perfectly. Here's a quote from it. Impatient, lacking work ethic, unserious. These descriptors appeared in an article posted earlier this year on LinkedIn that lamented the shortcomings of young people in the workplace. Many readers assumed the adjectives referred to Generation Z employees, but they didn't. The words had been pulled from a 1950s issue of Life magazine and described baby boomers who were at that time new to the workplace. This confirms my brewing assumption that maybe nothing's inherently wrong with our generation. Maybe it's just easy to spot negativities in people that don't have as much life experience as you. I'm not saying some of these negative traits don't exist in some people, but acting like it's some fatal flaw with an entire group of people just doesn't really make sense to me. Also, of course, there's going to be some differences between generations, but it doesn't always mean that these differences are bad, and maybe you just see it as negative because they're different from you. So back to that article, Megan Gerhardt said something that I liked. She said, "The first burst of a new generation into the workplace always causes ripples. They've learned new tools and types of expertise that may not easily fit with established ways of doing things, but each generation learns the tools they need to survive in their own time." So another point I want to make is that this is the first time in history that we have the type of technological connection to where people can get on the internet and talk negatively about an entire group of people together. One piece of conversation that is similar to another piece of conversation is going to build and build and build until it just becomes fact. And I think in this case, that's a huge problem. Now, to be a little more lighthearted, I do think that there's like a rite of passage where the generation above you can kind of talk a little bit of smack about you. It's kind of like that younger, older sibling relationship where it's like, okay, like we can beef, but it doesn't have to be that serious. But like when I see like a Gen Xer or a baby boomer being like, they don't know how to do anything, like you don't really know what it would be like unless you actually try to sit there and think and step into our shoes. So I don't know, that at that point it just becomes unrelatable. So here's another TikTok that kind of highlights this point.
As somebody who was born in 96, which is basically like the cusp generation of like, are you an older Gen Z? Are you a young millennial? We don't know. It's kind of crazy watching millennials talk about Gen Z the way that boomers and Gen X used to talk about millennials. And listen to me when I say this, because I remember when the things that we used to do as the young millennials or older Gen Z, anything that we did, they would blame on millennials. All of our challenges that we did, all of like the really stuff that, you know, was very obviously being done by teenagers, they just put it on millennials. They would always bash millennials and be like, millennials don't know how to act. They keep doing these dumb things online. It was like, no, that was us. Now millennials are doing the same thing with Gen Alpha, because anytime that Gen Alpha is online doing stuff and acting a certain way, they're like, why is Gen Z acting this way? And it's just like, Diva, that is the youngest of Gen Z and Gen Alpha acting that way. You should know how this feels to be talked about like that. Of all the generations, I just didn't expect millennials to really do it, because like, y'all swore that y'all were not gonna act like them. And it's like, what are we doing here?
I do want to say that there can be healthy banter between generations about what's good, what's bad, as long as we're not like labeling it to be the worst problem ever. Because let's be real, on an individual level, people can grow, people can change, and I know Gen Z talks badly about older generations too, but I do think people love saying things about our generation because I think we're just so different from the other ones. I think they're obsessed with us. I really do. I low-key just think we're kind of fascinating for some reason. And maybe the power we give off is a little too much for them. Just a hot take. So yeah, I mean, it really is a tale as old as time as an older generation picking on the younger generation. So I'm not going to sit here and act like it's exclusive to us, but I feel like the effects it can have might be a little more intimidating because everyone is on the internet and we may be impressionable to some of these negative viewpoints about us. And maybe it's kind of like the thing where it's like you keep hearing this and then you become it. And that's what I don't want to happen. Also, for everyone, for Gen Alpha, Gen Z, Millennials, Gen X, Boomers, the silent generation, I want everyone to remember, had you been born in a different generation, you would have adopted some of the exact traits that you now criticize. So I think if you're truly seeing a pattern or trend that's specific to a generation and you have a problem with it, maybe try to just go to that individual person and help out, or try to talk about it in a more helpful way online. So that's all I have for y'all today. I'm Gen Z. If you're from a different generation, come into the comments and tell me what you think, if you agree or disagree. So that's all I got. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I will see y'all next time. Bye.
Gen Z. Is anyone Gen Z here? Gen Z? Look at y'all outside.